started. So thank you guys all for taking the time to meet with me this morning. We have had this scheduled for a little while, and I've been super excited to get a chance to connect with you all so we can get started with enabling your exams with Honorlock and begin using it this semester and administering those proctored exams. My name is Kimberly Polda. Kim is totally fine. I will be hosting this training session today, and I'm the Customer Success Manager okay, sorry, I'm just taking a peek at the chat here. Yes, Laura, you should be hearing us or hearing me. Thanks, Gretchen. I'll let you go ahead and take a peek, and you too, John, at that chat. I'm the Customer Success Manager for your institution, so I'm the main point of contact here at Honorlock. Today's presentation is going to go through pretty much everything that is needed in order to get started with using Honorlock on your exams within your Blackboard instance. So today we're going to walk through the process of adding the Honorlock LTI into your course, launching it for the first time so you see it available, and then we're going to discuss all of the different options that are going to be visible to you to begin enabling your exams with proctoring. From there, we'll take a peek at the student side. So I love taking the opportunity to take you guys through the student experience and what that looks like on your students' end for when they launch their proctored exams. I find it's very helpful, so that way you have a little bit of an idea, or at least a better idea, for what that'll look like on your students' side when they start to take your proctored exams with Honorlock. And then we'll come back into our test instance here and take a peek at the results so you can get familiar with where you can access these recorded exam setting or sessions, and then what that's going to look like. Okay, so I still see there's a couple of folks still joining us. I'm just still letting people in as we're getting started. Now, just to kind of take care of a few housekeeping items, I like to give everybody an overview of kind of what Honorlock is and what the service is going to entail for your institution. Our proctoring service is going to be on demand, so it's something that your students will be able to use any time of day once your exams have been enabled. What that means is that our service is going to piggyback off of your exam settings as they have been allocated within Blackboard. So if your exam is open Monday morning until Wednesday night, your students can log in anytime, 3 a.m., 3 p.m., and they will be still prompted to take their exam with Honorlock proctoring. Okay, so it's one of the great things about it is that they're not required to download and install any bulky application to their device. Our service is simply just a Chrome extension that will get added to their Chrome browser when they log in to take their first proctored exam. So we do have a couple of prerequisites in that regard for your students, and the fact that they have to be using a compatible device, a device that's either a Windows computer, a Mac computer. We're also compatible with Chromebooks. We do not support testing on iPads, tablets, or cell phones at the moment. They must also be using the Google Chrome web browser because we are a Chrome extension. That is where they'll go to access and be successful with adding the extension to their browser. Now on the student's end, that's pretty much it. Obviously, we want to have them recorded, so they will also need a webcam, a working webcam. A lot of times nowadays, these are built in directly to the device, so it should not be an issue. If students do not have a webcam on their device, we do support external webcams. They just must be set up into their computer or on their computer. We cannot support cell phones being used as a webcam. So a little bit more about Honorlock and what our service entails is that our service is backed by AI, or artificial intelligence. So there's not live proctors that are going to be watching the full duration of your students taking your exams online. We get a little bit mixed reviews on how comfortable they are with that. So we've actually implemented AI that will be doing kind of the legwork here. And when the AI is triggered with a series of different types of flags or notifications, that'll then alert one of our live proctors that are available and on call 24/7. So in the event that a live proctor is notified, what they do is conduct a live pop-in on your student's exam session, and they join your student to ensure they are complying with your exam guidelines. A live pop-in is going to take over the student's whole screen, so they will not be able to see the question that they were on. And while the exam time does continue running, our proctors are trained to work as quickly and efficiently with your students to have them assist or to have them comply with either putting away unauthorized materials, asking third parties to leave, or maybe just testing in a compliant exam environment. So there's a ton of different reasons why a proctor would pop in. And what's great to know here is that as an instructor, all of this is going to be visible and accessible for your review after your students have tested. So what our service does is captures recordings of your students via their webcam and of their screen. So we're going to have side-by-side footage of what had happened during the exam session. And there's also going to be what we call session logs. And those logs are going to indicate with timestamps every action the student took, questions that they were on, and any of those either AI generated flags on their session or any of those live pop-ins that could have occurred. So I will discuss a little bit more of this in detail as we're going through today's presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions along the way. So if you guys want to leverage the chat like you have done already so far to ask any questions while we're going through today's training, please feel free to type them out in there. I'll keep an eye on it and be happy to answer them as we're going through it all. I anticipate having a couple minutes at the end too, so if that helps, you can save them for the end, and we can also open up for a little bit more of a Q&A. Does anybody have anything so far before we move on? Okay, perfect. Now I do know I talk a little quick sometimes, so if I am going a little fast, just let me know. Type it in the chat to slow down, and typically when I get going, I'll just kind of speed up. So I try to make a mental note of it, but just feel free to chat in and tell me to slow down if I'm going too quickly. Now what we're going to do to get started is I've already accessed my Blackboard account. I'm going to go into my course, and the very first step here is to Amy will address connectivity issues in just a little bit. We're going to just talk about the instructor side here first with accessing the LTI and adding it into your course. However, keep in mind students do need to have a working internet connection that is stable in order to maintain connection to the exam for one thing in Blackboard, as well as maintain an active recording with Honorlock. So once you're in your course here, I'm just going to click on my content. Okay, and now you guys are not going to see an Honorlock LTI in here just yet. What we need to do first, and if you're following along, great, we can kind of go through this step by step. If not, remember this is recorded, and we also have guides on this in the knowledge base that I'll be sharing a link with you guys with too. So you can always reference that as well. However, it just depends on however you like to learn this, if you want to follow along or just watch my screen. Once you're in the content, you're going to hover over Tools, and you're going to see Honorlock LTI in your tools here. Okay, so when you click on this, this is required in every course before you're able to enable your first exam with Honorlock. And what we're going to do is first name it. So you can go ahead and just call it Honorlock or Honorlock LTI. Description is not required. We don't need an attachment either. So as we continue to scroll down here, the next thing you'll see here are the options. Options, we want to ensure that it is selected as yes and then no. The date and times here are not applicable. You'll go ahead from here and click on submit. Okay, so pretty straightforward. All we're doing is adding this Honorlock LTI into your course, naming it, coming down to the bottom, clicking on submit. Mine is already in here, so I'm just going to click on cancel. However, once you submit it, you're then going to see an Honorlock LTI now that you can access within your course. Now, what's really important here to remember is that in order to begin using the tool, we have to actually first launch it. And in order to launch it, all you have to do is click on the LTI. Okay, and this is going to open up a new tab in your browser. It's likely that you're going to see a question here, or at least an authorization to proceed. Please just click on yes, and that way it allows us to make those connections that are necessary on the back end. From there, you'll then come into what we call kind of like the home screen for the Honorlock LTI, where you can now see all of the exams that may be in your course already. However, this is kind of what this home screen is going to look like, at least for the Honorlock point of view. And we're going to kind of We're going to toggle back and forth here between the Honorlock LTI and back within Blackboard, because you're actually going to have the opportunity to enable your exams directly within the assessments edit options. Okay, so when you click on the Honorlock LTI, this is going to bring you to this home screen. And let's just take a moment to first talk about this home screen, because there's a lot of tools and resources in here that I like to touch on. And then we're going to take a peek at how to enable the exams back in Blackboard. Now, first things first, I know I mentioned earlier our service is on demand and our proctoring agents are available 24/7, 365. That also applies to our support team. So although I am your main point of contact here at Honorlock, if there are any issues that you're experiencing, any questions that you have, or you're uncertain of how to proceed with setting up an exam or looking at results, maybe you're doing this late at night or over the weekend, I'm not available 24/7 like our support team. So I highly recommend leveraging them so that way you can get immediate assistance. If it's something that they can't help you with, I'm always looped in anyways so that I can follow up with you with more help. Now, in that regard, you'll see in the bottom right corner, there is a little chat bubble. So directly within the Honorlock home screen here, you have the option to connect with our support team. And again, they're available at all hours, all days, anytime you need them. This is the best way to get in contact with our support team because it is pretty quick. You'll usually get responded to in less than a couple of minutes. And that's the same thing for your students here. However, I also wanted to share with you all our support site, because our support site is also going to include other ways for you to communicate with us, because as faculty, we also have opportunities for you to dial in if you would rather speak to somebody or send us an email. So I am going to throw our support link in the chat if you guys would like to bookmark this. This is a really great place to go if you have any questions. And as you scroll down just a little bit further here, I always like to touch on this because on our support site, you also have the option to provide students with a simple single-click test. Now, this simple test is going to provide your students with the option to run a system check, and this just verifies that their device meets the minimum system requirements in regards to using a compatible operating system, making sure they're using an up-to-date version of Google Chrome, and that they have a sufficient network speed. So if your students are not sure if they're going to be able to take the exam, if maybe their network is spotty, or they're not sure how old their device is, this is something that they can come to and run as often as needed. All right, so back within our Honorlock homepage here, that was in the live chat bubble in the bottom right corner that you always have available. In the top right corner, you're also going to see 3 dots. This drops down to a menu. Let me just refresh it. It's stuck on my side here. Oh no, my Blackboard is frozen. Give me 1 second, guys. I apologize. Okay. So when you click on those 3 dots in the top right corner, you're going to see the menu here. And this menu is going to provide you with an Honorlock guide, the opportunity to manage profiles, register third-party exam, and add a practice exam. Now, this Honorlock guide is really helpful too, especially for us as we're just getting started. When you click on this guide, it's actually going to bring you directly into our knowledge base, and it'll walk you through a step-by-step instructions on how to add Honorlock into your course, as well as everything we've talked about so far, and then going through enabling your exams. So it's a really great reference here to kind of leverage. You can bookmark our knowledge base to your browser as well so that you can come back to this if you need. As you'll see on the left-hand side, we have a ton of other types of articles and guides that you can also click on. If you have questions on how to do something with Honorlock, it's almost with certainty I can say we have a guide on how to do it with screenshots and step-by-step instructions. So really great hub to kind of keep in mind. And again, this is the homepage for the knowledge base. I'm just going to also include this in the chat so that you guys, you guys also have this handy. Okay, so back in the Honorlock LTI here, man, my mouse is getting a little funky today. I'm sorry, guys. We have managing profiles. We'll talk a little bit about this as we're setting up our first exam, but profiles are going to be a way for you to simply enable an exam with your desired level of proctoring quickly, instead of having to go through and select one by one individually what your proctoring settings are and student guidelines are. You can set up profiles so that maybe you have a specific profile for your high stakes exams. Maybe those settings are a little bit more strict on proctoring. And then maybe you have another profile for your low stakes quizzes, homework assignments, or something else like a practice exam that doesn't have as strict proctoring settings applied. So these profiles are just helpful to expedite that enabling process moving forward. Register third-party exam is going to apply to any instructor who would like to set up an assessment to be proctored on a third-party platform, such as Pearson Sites, My Math Lab, McGraw-Hill Connect. Typically, any one of those platforms that can host an exam that is password protected can be registered with Honorlock to be taken as a proctored exam. We'll talk a little bit about this and more in a moment. And then the last option is in here is to add a practice exam. Now, as a best practice, we recommend that each instructor add at least one practice exam into each of their courses before students take their first high stakes exam. We always recommend using our practice exam here as well. Once you click on this, it'll walk you through the steps on how to add the practice exam into your course and then going through enabling it. The reason why we recommend using our practice exam is that they are designed to be free of charge to the institution. We're not actually capturing recordings during this proctoring session. Students don't know this. It's just a practice exam on their end, but it's a really great way for you to get familiar with how to enable your exams with proctoring settings, and then for your students on how to launch a proctored exam, all before they log in to take their first real high stakes assessment with Honorlock. Okay, now let's get to the fun part here on how to enable your exams with Honorlock. I'm going to go back into Blackboard. And like I mentioned earlier, the great thing about this is that we piggyback off of your exam settings. So in order to begin enabling your exam, let me just make sure that these aren't enabled already. Looks like they are. Let me just turn that off real fast. The settings for your Honorlock exam are going to show up directly within Blackboard so that you're able to come in here and enable the assessment while you're editing the test options. I'm having some really serious problems with Blackboard right now, so I'm just going to log out real fast and log back in. Bear with me for 1 second here. I hope this helps to stop the issues that I'm having. It's not letting me click on editing my test options or anything. Okay.
Kim, take your time. We've all been there. We all go through it from time to time. So we're a patient group, so no worries.
Thanks, John. I don't know what is the deal this morning with this. I updated my Chrome browser this morning, so I have a feeling maybe something went out of whack with this, but I'm just going to relaunch it real quick. At least I can see my mouse again, so we're off to a good start. Okay, there we go. Now I'm just gonna disable this real fast so then we can walk through the enabling. Okay, so, and we'll submit that. Okay, guys. Now, any exam that you've already created in your course, you can come in through here after you have launched the Honorlock LTI to now enable it with proctoring. What we're going to do now is click on the little drop-down arrow beside your exam and select Edit the Test Options. So now after you've launched the LTI and come back into Blackboard, the test options are now going to show you the opportunity to enable your exam with Honorlock. Okay, so it has its own little dedicated section here. In order to get started, we'll click on Enable. And then you're going to see all of the different proctoring settings and student guidelines to begin selecting your desired level of proctoring. So let's take a peek here at all of these different options so we can begin reviewing what you can and kind of can and cannot select from to get your students ready to take this proctored exam. I'm going to start at the top left here where you'll see record webcam. And as you can see, all these blue check marks are going to indicate that these toggles are currently enabled. To disable any of these settings, simply reselect them, and that'll turn that setting off. The first one here for record webcam is going to capture HD video of your student's face and their testing environment using the webcam built into their device while they're taking your exam. Now, we do recommend leaving this on, obviously, so we're able to have our AI engaged and track your students' behaviors. Any of those flags will be generated automatically for you, and so this is something that we do recommend leaving enabled. To the right of that is going to be record screen, and this is going to capture HD video of your student's laptop or their desktop screen. And like I mentioned earlier, when these two are on, you're now going to have side-by-side footage after the fact to review the student, what they were doing on their device and also in person. To the right of that is record web traffic, and this is going to log and monitor the student's browser activity within Google Chrome during the exam. And then dropping down to the next row is where you're going to see the first step that is included within the student's authentication. Now, when students are launching their proctored exam, they will be required to come through here and begin authenticating that they are indeed a student in your course. And then the very first step of that with this on is to capture the student photo, which is them taking a still or a selfie with their webcam before they're moving on. The student ID is the next step, and this is going to require your students to take a picture with their webcam of their government-issued photo ID or their school-issued photo ID. It does have to have their face on it and their name on it because Honorlock is going to verify the name on the ID aligns with the name that's listed within your LMS, so the name in the Blackboard course. The next part of authentication will be the room scan, and the room scan is going to require that the students show a 360-degree view of their testing environment. There is on-screen messaging that will show them how to do so when they are launching their assessment. However, what's important to remember with the room scan here is that the AI is not yet engaged at this point. Okay, that's going to start as soon as the student begins their exam. So if the student is conducting their room scan and they have a cell phone out, or they have maybe another person in the room with them, it's not going to pick up on any of those discrepancies. And we also want to make sure that we are being extremely clear and concise on those expectations for students on what you want them to show during the room scan. So you can hold them accountable to some degree as to what you need them to do or not do at this point. I'm just speaking from experience. A lot of instructors that I work with will leverage these room scans to ensure that students are testing in a compliant environment. And they will make sure that they're doing this in a slow fashion, showing a full 360 and showing any devices or any of those materials that maybe they are permitted. So if scratch paper is allowed, it's helpful to let your students know that during the room scan, I want you to show me your blank pieces of scratch paper, maybe a handheld calculator that you're allowed, and maybe I also need to see your cell phone being turned off and being placed out of reach. So things along those lines that you can kind of elaborate here and give students the opportunity to share during the room scan are helpful just to set the expectations for testing. Now, those 6 toggles we just talked about are what we recommend having enabled for each of your exams to uphold the recording components with Honorlock, and then also require the authentication. Those 3 steps in authentication do not deduct any time from the student's exam session, as that does not start until the student sees question 1. Moving to the next row is where you'll see an option for manual review. Now, this is currently an additional level of service that Honorlock offers. Currently, the institution does not subscribe to this at the moment, so this is going to be locked off for your school right now. However, within Honorlock, you also have two options here to give students access to a basic four-function calculator or a scientific calculator. We always like to recommend leveraging one of these if you're permitting students to use a calculator while testing, so that we can, again, just prevent students from using a handheld device that could allude towards a cell phone, or maybe even a calculator that's not supposed to be used during their exam. In the next row, we have disable copy paste, and this is going to prevent your students from copying exam content and pasting it outside of the exam. And then when disable printing is enabled, this is going to prevent your students from accessing the browser print function or the right-click option to print or export the exam content. Now, next over is Browser Guard, and Browser Guard is going to be Honorlock's secure browser solution to prevent exam takers from accessing external applications outside of Google Chrome or any additional Chrome tabs in their browser. Any attempt that they make to access an external application will generate an automated flag on their exam session to be reviewed by the instructor when reviewing your students' results. So with Browser Guard enabled, if they attempt to access anything outside of the exam window, Browser Guard will consistently push their exam window to the forefront of their screen. And then keep in mind, because we are capturing their screen recording, this is all visible to you as the instructor to see what they were trying to do during their exam and what they were trying to pull up. Now, with Browser Guard enabled, if you also need to allow access to maybe a specific resource, perhaps you're going to give students the ability to use an online graphing calculator, we can come down to allowed site URLs. And when this is enabled, there's a new field that will show up in the space below, allowing you to configure the unique URLs that students are permitted to use, where everything else is going to be off limits. So a frequent one that instructors will use is called desmos.com. This is going to be an online graphing calculator. So I'll add in that URL, click on add site. And now this is something that students will be able to pull up in a new Chrome tab with everything else that is not going to be accessible. As a best practice, anything that you are allowing your students to use in regards to configured URLs, you'll also want to include in your exam instructions, so that way they have that link easily accessible and can click on it when they are taking your proctored exam. The very last option that you see here is for simulated, not proctored. And what this is going to do is it's going to provide your students with basically a simulated proctored exam. This should only be used for your low stakes or your no stakes assessments, as this is only going to simulate the proctoring experience. There will be no recordings captured and no flagging to review after the session is complete. It really is just to give the students the thought that they're being proctored on an exam, when in reality they are not. Okay, I saw a question come through here. Is print screen capture disable as default? Disable printing, you mean? If this is something that I believe is enabled by default. So this will automatically prevent students on your exams, but always recommend going through and checking your proctoring settings as you're enabling your exams to make sure that if this is a toggle that you want to have enabled, it is checked off. Any other questions about the proctoring settings before we move on? Okay. Wendy, you're not seeing it at all in your proctoring settings? Okay, I'm going to take a note and I'll check on that after this. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, so as we scroll down to the next section here, we have student guidelines. The student guidelines are going to be a way for you to let your students know what is and is not allowed during the exam. Now you'll see 9 options here. Students are going to see all 9 of these when they launch your proctored exam. However, whatever you check off and mark as allowed versus not checking off and leaving as not allowed is going to dictate that verbiage on the student's end. So for example, in this scenario, my student guidelines will say open book not allowed because it's not checked off, notes allowed because it is, and they'll see scratch paper not allowed, restroom breaks not allowed. So you can leverage these settings to let students know what they can and cannot do during the exam session. However, what's really important to note here is that these settings will not be impacted by the AI or the artificial intelligence, as these are simply guidelines for your students to provide them with what they can and cannot do. Exam sessions will not be flagged for any student's behavior against these activities. So if I'm wearing headphones and headphones are not allowed, there will not be a flag there for that. These are for students to be aware of what they can and cannot do. Keep in mind, if a live proctor does join your student's exam session for one of the reasons that they are not abiding by your guidelines above for those proctoring settings and any of those AI generated flags, and we notice that they're wearing headphones, our proctors will absolutely still address those and ask the students to remove them and comply with your guidelines. Now, to take a peek at a few of these guidelines and see what they will entail, open book is pretty self-explanatory. This is just going to allow your students to use a physical book or an ebook during the exam. Remember that if they are allowed to use an ebook and you have enabled Browser Guard, you'll want to ensure that the ebook URL has been marked as an allowed site, so that way they have the opportunity to access it and pull it up. For notes allowed, this is just going to allow your students to reference any physical notes that they have in a binder or a notebook. And if scratch paper is allowed, this permits your students to use multiple sheets of blank paper and a writing utensil during the assessment. Now, what I've seen really frequently is students are using a tablet or an iPad as their scratch paper, or where they house their notes, or where they pull up an ebook. And we don't permit students to use secondary devices unless it has been instructed within the proctoring settings here or the additional instructions. So if this is something that you would allow your students to do, you'll want to ensure that you include this information within this free text field here. If students are seen using an iPad or a tablet to reference any of those three, the proctors will ask them to remove those devices and power them off. Next up is restroom breaks allowed, and this is going to permit your students to leave the webcam view for a short period of time. Keep in mind that this will flag their exam session if they choose to utilize this. Our AI is making sure that a student does remain in their webcam view throughout the duration of their exam session. So anytime they are not visible or they walk away, that will flag their session automatically. Now, as a best practice, we recommend that you add additional instructions in the space below here if you are allowing students to take breaks or use the restroom, to provide them with information surrounding the duration or the frequency that they can leave the webcam view, just so that our proctors can also provide specific instructions to your students if you would like to limit those breaks. If breaks are allowed and this is on, we recommend having students be aware that they must contact our live chat support team when they're ready to use that break, so our proctors and support agents can ensure they come back in a timely fashion. If a handheld calculator is allowed and you check this option off, this will indicate that your students can use a handheld calculator, but it does not include the calculator that is found on their cell phone. If headphones are allowed, this just indicates that students can wear any type of headphone while taking the exam. Again, just as a best practice in my experience, we recommend leaving this toggle as not allowed and left off, simply because if students are wearing maybe like wireless headphones or AirPods, you don't know where that AirPod is connected. If they're on a phone call or just listening to music, it's difficult to diagnose exactly what they're listening to, or if they're receiving third-party help on an exam. So headphones may be a light one to kind of tread on. Hats allowed permits your students to wear a baseball hat or a hoodie on their head while they're taking the exam. Again, something that you can use at your own discretion. Sometimes if hats are worn, it may be covering their eyes, and that could also cause an issue with the AI for recognizing their face sufficiently. Also keep in mind here, though, that Honorlock will always allow students to wear any religious head coverings during assessments. And if students are testing in a public location where a mask is required, they'll only need to remove that to authenticate into their exam. From there, they can place the mask back on and not have any issues with testing. Which brings us to take an exam in a public area, which is up next. With this is allowed, this indicates that your students can complete their assessment in a public location, such as a coffee shop or a library, maybe somewhere else where they have a better internet connection if their one at home is not that great. It just simply indicates that there may be other people around them and noise may be present. It's also helpful to know here that when this is allowed, students are not able to interact with other people that may be in that testing environment. With background noise allowed, this is just going to permit your students to be in an environment where other people are talking or there's excessive background noise. If you allow them to have music playing or a TV on, this is something that you can also leave on. All right, I saw a couple questions come through, so let's take a peek at those. I'm not sure who asked this one, but how and where do you set time limits? I'm not sure if you are in the beginning, but we did say that, you know, our settings or our services piggyback off of your exam settings in Blackboard. So those time limits that you have allocated within Blackboard, Honorlock will automatically piggyback off of them. That also includes time accommodations for students. So if the exam is scheduled for 90 minutes and you have a student with time and a half, they'll be able to automatically honor that and they'll get their time as it has been set up within the Blackboard end. I think that just answered Amy's question too for accommodations, at least for time accommodations. Can you clarify what wearable devices are? We're not going to allow students to wear smartwatches if that's what you're referring to when they're taking the exam. And if it is seen when we are conducting a pop-in, that will be asked to be removed. They're allowed to wear glasses. If you have specific requirements for your students, I haven't seen any students wearing AI glasses, but if it's something that you're aware that your students are wearing and using, we can kind of get down to the additional instructions field here, which is hidden directly below. And this is where you can further elaborate those expectations for your students. So I understand these 9 options are a little broad and there's going to be exceptions to what else you need to set guidelines for on your students. These additional instructions are going to be really helpful so that you can use this free text field to further elaborate what you want your students either to comply with or not do when they're taking your exam. We do have some standardized exam guidelines that you can leverage for this field, so that way you can further elaborate that for your students, and you can come into our knowledge base here and copy and paste this into that setting or that section if you would like. However, this is a really helpful template to utilize so that it sets those expectations for students regarding a testing area and testing behavior. Ultimately, our proctors are trying to ensure that students are following your guidelines and that they're trying to emulate a testing environment to the best of their ability at home. So testing area, it's really important that they have a well-lit surrounding. You know, if they're testing in the dark, our AI is going to have a difficult time being able to detect a face throughout their exam session. And that is something that we need to ensure is visible within their webcam. It's also helpful to elaborate to students, or at least set the expectation for them, that they must be seated at a table or a desk. I've seen tons of exam sessions where students don't know otherwise and they're not told otherwise in the exam guidelines. So they're laying down in bed in the dark with the TV on, eating a bag of chips. And there's really just no other information for them to not do or to not try to emulate a testing environment at home. So these are really great resources to lean on, so that way you can let students know what is expected, as well as testing behavior. So not leaving the room during the exam session at all, no breaks, cell phone use and smartwatch use, and AI glasses is prohibited. And then just kind of giving them these testing guidelines within these additional instructions. This field will be visible to your students when they launch their exam. Amy asked a great question. If a student feels they would rather use our testing center and prefer not to be recorded, is there an option for that? Absolutely. I'll touch on the bypass codes in just a little bit here, but it is something that we'll have the opportunity to assist students with. So even if students have specific accommodations too, where they're not able to test at home or they don't have a sufficient device or a working webcam, there's going to be ways that we can help with making sure you only have to set up one exam, and then those students that have to go into a testing center or test in a different environment with a different device has the option to be proctored in person instead. The last field here at the bottom is for accommodations. Like I mentioned earlier, we do piggyback off of the exam settings in Blackboard. So if you have already set up a time accommodation for a student, time and a half, double time, that'll automatically be applied to their exam, and you won't have anything extra to do here in Honorlock. The accommodation section, though, is only visible to our internal team, our proctoring and support agents. So whatever you put here is kind of like a direct message to our Honorlock agents as to any exceptions from the above proctoring guidelines or proctoring settings and student guidelines. This would be an ideal field to inform our team. Maybe restroom breaks are not allowed for anybody, but maybe there is a student down here who can use the restroom. And perhaps there's also another student who needs a screen reader. Any of those students that do have specific accommodations should contact our support team when they're starting their exam. So that way, if they do have special exceptions while testing, we can ensure that none of those proctoring settings are going to inhibit their ability to use those additional accommodations or settings that they may need. All right, and then the very last field is for exam visibility. And what this is going to do by default is be set to no, use the dates on the exam to determine the student view. What that means is that Honorlock is going to then respect the exam availability, dates and times that you have set up within the Blackboard exam settings. So if this exam is available Monday through Wednesday, students will only see the exam to be taken Monday through Wednesday. If you change this and you toggle this to yes, always show the exam in the student view, this is going to allow your exam takers to see the assessment listed outside of that preset window, those preset date and time parameters that you had previously selected. So we recommend leaving this on no to simply abide by those previously set dates and times. Alice, not to my knowledge, no. This field is only visible to our proctors and support agents to assist your students. So if they do have a specific accommodation, we'd want to make sure that we are ensuring that that is indeed the correct student that is receiving that specific accommodation. Yep, no problem. Now within here, you'll go ahead and click on the save option. That'll then save those Honorlock settings for your exam. It'll now see that it has been enabled. If you open this back up again, you can make any changes if you needed to update anything, or if you forgot to check something off or add in additional instructions. And what's helpful to know here too is that there is a little live chat bubble here also. So if you're working in here, setting up your exam in Blackboard, you have the option to go ahead and chat in with our support team if you have any questions. Now scrolling down a little bit, what you're going to now see is that the password field for your exam has been checked off, grayed out, and can no longer be changed. So this is something that is intended behavior. This is what Honorlock does in order to successfully enable your exam with proctoring. And we overwrite this password field if you had a previous password set up in here. We also gray this out so that way you cannot make changes to this access code password field. What our service does is that once students proceed past the authentication steps, we place this password in for them and usher them into a proctored environment. So students do not need a password to start your proctored exams. If they're being prompted for a password when they launch their Honorlock enabled exams, it's likely they're using the wrong browser, they have maybe not a supported device, or they're not up to date on their computer or browser. So this access code field is entirely intended, and this unique code should not be removed or changed whatsoever once your exam has been enabled. If you make updates to this after you have set up your exam with Honorlock, this will impact the student's testing experience. Okay, so super important field not to make changes to after you have enabled it. Amy asked if we allow extension after the fact. You'll just come in here and just make sure you update these days and times that are available to students. And then that's what will determine when they can see the exam on the student's end. Now at the very bottom, obviously everything else is the same here in Blackboard. So you can click on submit to save those changes. And your exam has been successfully enabled with Honorlock. Students will now be prompted to add the extension before they get started and then go through the authentication before they can begin. Deborah asked, is it possible for students to access the test without Honorlock if the password is removed? Yes, so that's why it's really important not to touch the password field after you have enabled Honorlock, because that field is something that we use as a token to authenticate students into the proctored environment. If there are any changes made to that field and students are still supposed to take a proctored exam, that can impact their students' testing experience, allowing them to start non-proctored or posing issues for them to start the exam if that password field has been removed. Now, if you intend on not having them take the proctored exam, that's not an issue. But in order to have Honorlock proctor the assessment, that access or that password field must remain the same. And it'll always look like that, where it says HL no edit with a series of characters afterwards. So as soon as you see that, you know your exam has been successfully enabled, and then you'll want to make sure not to change that field. Now let's go ahead and take a peek at the student experience. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions on enabling your exam or any of those test options that we went through so far? Any other ones at least? Great question. The use of double screens is not permitted because we are recording the screen when you check off that proctoring setting. It only allows students to be using a single screen on their device. Now, if there is an accommodation for that, we can assist students on a one-by-one basis with doing so. Simply include that student's name and their accommodation in that section. So that way we are able to make sure they get started successfully. Wendy asks, I often have to add user availability within Blackboard to allow students additional time or date. Is that allowed? Yep, just as we discussed with the accommodations, we piggyback off of those exam settings. So as long as the student has been provided with the accommodation in Blackboard, Honorlock will honor that automatically. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and get my exam prepped to take as the student's end. All I like to do is, because I share this with a couple of my colleagues, is make sure that they don't come in and turn on browser guard for me in between exams, making it difficult for me to take the exam on a training session. So I saw a couple more questions. Hi, Dr. Wilson, no worries. I assume this is taking the place of Lockdown Browser. When will be in use? You can begin using this now. It's active in your Blackboard instance.
Hey, Kim, if you don't mind, I just want to interject for one quick second.
Sure.
We're actually, Dr. Wilson, we're going to have this in addition to the browser. So, you can use either one. So yeah, there we go. Gretchen, did I say that correctly, Gretchen? I think I got that right.
Yes, so we originally went with Respondus Lockdown Browser before even the pandemic rolled around. And what we found was there were students who were struggling with Respondus and Lockdown Browser. And so that's where Honorlock came into the picture, is we looked at several products, and Honorlock was going to kind of fill that gap for our students who were having trouble with Respondus. So it's definitely not disappearing. We're still kind of evaluating those options moving forward, but for now we have both tools.
Perfect, thank you. And just as a reminder, we don't recommend using Respondus in conjunction with Honorlock. That can get a little bit clunky on the student's end. And I have not heard of good experiences with that. So if you'd prefer to use Honorlock, you can implement the browser guard setting there, and then just kind of leverage those screen recordings to further diagnose any academic dishonesty. And yes, Dr. Wilson, it is compatible with a Chromebook. We support Windows, Mac, and Chromebooks, just no testing on iPad, tablets, or cell phones. Deborah also asked another question. If I need to allow access to our URL, and this will require going to other pages, do I need to add all of the URLs? Typically, Deborah, if you are going to be permitting access to or allowing the site for a URL, you will allow it at the highest level. So let's say we're logging into like a certain platform. As long as you allow that platform, it'll then unlock the rest of the whole platform. If you want to provide access to just a specific link or site on a platform, you'll want to ensure that the URL for that site has been allowed, and then any login instances that students may need. So just to make sure they don't have issues with getting to a login page first. Awesome, you're welcome. All right, so let's take a peek at the student view here. I'm just going to enter my student view. All right, and pull up the exam now. Now from the student's end, they will see an Honorlock LTI as well. They'll also still see their exams that they have to take. Students can click on the Honorlock link in order to then pull up the exams that they have to take with proctoring. However, remember that in order to get started first, they have to add the extension. Now this process is rather quick. It doesn't take more than a minute or so to add the Honorlock extension to their browser. And those that were late to joining, our service is not a bulky application or anything that students have to actually download and install to their device. It's just an extension to their Chrome browser. So this process will show up for any students who have not yet taken a proctored exam with Honorlock. All they have to do is check off the box and get started. Once they add the extension, they'll be able to see any of their assessments that have been added or that have to be taken with Honorlock proctoring. We'll go ahead and click on Add to Chrome. Add the extension, and then you'll see that show up in the top right corner. And once it's added, I'm just going to go up here and pin it so we can constantly see it right there in my toolbar. And then when we go back into Blackboard here, it's automatically going to recognize the exam was added. Now it's going to show your students all of the exams that have been enabled with Honorlock in your course so that they can begin starting and launching whichever one they need to take. From the student's end, they have in the bottom right corner the little live chat bubble. So at any point during, or actually before, during, and even after their exam, if they have questions on how to get started, they're not sure how to launch their exam, they're more than welcome to lean on our support team. We actually encourage it so that way we can diagnose an issue or see any problems they're having live and troubleshoot it with them as it's occurring. So please, if students are contacting you with problems, they're not sure of what to do, or maybe they're not able to proceed past a step, they're having network issues, have them reach out to our support team first, just because we are immediate and available 24/7. From here, what students will simply do is click on the launch button. And now I have to log in. Hold on one second. Let's see here. And I thought this was just within my student account, so it's odd that it's making me log back in again. Just going to go back and do that one more time. Okay, so it'll bring your students into the area where they are then able to see the option to launch proctoring and begin their exam. Now you'll see here that it does have proctoring support on the right-hand side. So they have live chat options. The guide, student guide, is going to be really helpful for any students who have not yet taken a proctored exam and maybe they're not sure of where to go. Once they click on this, it'll provide students with an overview on how to use Honorlock. And remember, we have those practice exams built in. So feel free to leverage those as a really great resource for students to get familiar with how to take a proctored exam initially, just in case they have any little bugs or kinks to work out on their end. The last thing your students want to do is be stressing while taking a proctored exam and it being like a high stakes midterm or a final. If the calculator was enabled as well, they'll see that option on the right-hand side here too. This is an example of what the scientific calculator will look like. And again, just as a friendly reminder, it's helpful to kind of permit students to use one of our on-screen calculators versus a handheld, just to mitigate any users maybe pulling out a cell phone or another unauthorized device while testing. Now, somebody asked earlier about using a testing center and being able to accommodate students that don't want to be recorded. In the event that a student would prefer to come to campus or have an in-person proctor their exam instead, on the instructor's end, all you'll have to do is still set up the same exam, enable it once, and you're good to go. However, the next step would be to either contact myself or contact our support team to request what we call a bypass PIN. If each exam will have an individual 5-digit bypass PIN that is automatically generated once the exam has been enabled with Honorlock. And by retrieving that PIN, that'll then allow you to then override proctoring for an individual student, whereas everybody else will still be prompted to launch proctoring. So retrieving that PIN, providing it to the testing center or whoever is going to be in person proctoring that student, will come over to the accessibility field and put in that 5-digit code here. So that way we can override proctoring. That will disable all of the previously enabled proctoring settings for the students. So that way they are able to be proctored in person rather than by using Honorlock. Just remember who uses that and which students test in person, so you can be sure to not expect a recorded session for them. So for the students, we'll go ahead and click on Launch Proctoring. And now this is going to pull up our webcam window. So this webcam window is now going to show you the students on their screen. The first step, like we saw earlier, is to capture a student photo. So they'll simply place their face in the frame and then click on Take Photo. The next step is going to be for the student ID. And again, students must be using a government issued license or a school issued ID. Has to have their name and face on it, so that way we can validate the student. They'll simply hold it up to the webcam and click on Take Photo. Now from here, they'll be prompted for the room scan, and this list gives students the opportunity to click on Begin Room Scan when they're ready. Remember that you want to elaborate to your students what to share in the room scan, and if there's any materials that they're allowed, that they show them maybe that this is my scratch paper, here's my pen, handheld calculator. Once they begin the room scan, they'll get a brief countdown, and then they can go ahead and pick up their laptop, show you their whole room, their whole desk. I'm obviously connected to a couple other things, so I'm not going to do a full 360, but you'll want to have your students kind of show their whole desk, their testing area. Maybe even you can have them, like I said earlier, show your phone being turned off, being placed behind them, just to mitigate the opportunity for them to use it at all during the exam. From there, they'll click on I'm done, and then students have the opportunity to either redo the room scan if they want to take another, or go ahead and submit the one that they just took, so that way they can proceed to the next step. I also have some really great resources on for your students to share with them in regards to taking a sufficient room scan during their exam, such as taking it nice and slow, showing their whole desktop, showing their phone being placed out of reach, and maybe even for those students that are using a desktop computer, they can go ahead and implement the use of a mirror to show their actual device screen to the webcam. I have a lot of other institutions implementing this, so that way they can also ensure there's no sticky notes or anything behind their desktop screen that may not be permitted when taking the exam. Now, the next step here is to launch the screen recording. And as you can see, there's on-screen messaging here. So we're going to click on Launch Screen Recording. We'll click on the single screen that we're able to capture and record, and then click on Share. And now students are going to be able to click to begin. So now when they click to begin, this is that portion in which students are then being ushered into that proctored environment, and Honorlock is putting that password in for them. So by clicking to begin, it'll let them know that it's authorizing, and then in the background, Blackboard is going to bring them into the very first question on the assessment. Okay, so now you'll see everything is being recorded. The bottom lets them know that app.honorlock is sharing and recording their screen. We also have the webcam window in the top left corner, and this is going to stay open throughout the duration of their exam. So it's really a great way for students to ensure that they are in the webcam view throughout the whole exam session. Now, a lot of times that may get pushed to the back. So like this, they may not see it, and they may just be moving around, taking their exam, thinking they're not being recorded, pulling out their phone, maybe looking up a question, whatever the case may be. However, they are always going to have the opportunity to pull that back up, because it's always going to be right there in the background too. So I know sometimes it can be a little bit uncomfortable for students to see themselves throughout the whole exam. They don't want to, so they like to see that it's behind their exam screen. Other students want to make sure that they're right in front of the webcam, so they like to see it up the whole time. Regardless, in the top right corner, you'll see that little Honorlock extension has a little red dot blinking on there. So right now, even if they're not looking at the webcam, it's a good way for them to quickly recognize that the extension is currently active recording and they're in their proctored environment. That does stop blinking once their exam session is submitted and their exam is complete. Now, within the webcam view here, like I mentioned earlier, they have to stay in view throughout the whole session. So if I even leave for a quick second and my face is not in view, this will automatically flag the exam session as the face has not been captured or detected by the AI. Now, if the student's face is not detected for a certain duration, this will pause their exam screen automatically until their face gets back into view. So a lot of times when I'm seeing student sessions, they'll have just like the top portion of their face in the webcam. They'll be looking at the bottom of their device and it'll pause their exam until they back up and their face is fully in view of the webcam. Now, for those instructors that are giving students maybe scratch paper to work on, or they need to be able to write down math questions or work out solutions on a piece of paper, in my experience, I've seen a lot of students that will either work really closely to their webcam, so that way when they're looking off screen and working, their face is not in view. That can also make the exam pause because the AI cannot detect their face. We recommend just making sure students sit far enough back. I'm still able to like work with a whole piece of paper here and a pen and be able to write down any equations and do any math that I may need to do for this question. So like I said, that practice exam is a really good opportunity for students to become familiar with what works best for them, making sure that they're able to stay in the view, and that way they don't have any unnecessary flags on their session. A couple other things that Honorlock is going to be able to flag during your student's exam session is secondary faces. So if another person were to walk into the room behind me, and maybe they're sitting on the bed behind me, or I'm sitting in a public location where I'm ordering food or sitting down somewhere and there's more people, that will also generate an automated or AI flag on the student's exam session because we are picking up more than one face. Additionally, all of the audio that is verbalized during the exam is going to be transcribed and connected to the AI too. So if the student is using any types of buzzwords, such as trying to use a personal assistant while testing, such as Siri, Alexa, or Google, that will automatically flag their exam session as well, informing you as the instructor that there were speech detected or was speech detected, and it could have been a personal assistant in use. Now, those are some of the flags that would also alert our live proctors that there may be some type of suspicious behavior going on. When that happens, our proctors enter what we call an analysis window, where they'll just kind of monitor the student's exam session to kind of make sure either whether or not that was a false alarm, or if they really are using maybe a secondary device with a personal assistant. Now, I am wearing just regular computer glasses, but a lot of times you can even see the student using a phone simply in the reflection of their glasses. And a lot of times our proctors will pick up on that too when they're entering in that analysis window, asking your students to comply with those exam guidelines, turn off the device, and place it out of reach, showing the webcam all of that. So it is captured and recorded as the instructor. You can then go back and review that. Now, on the student's end here in the bottom right corner, you'll also see the little live chat bubble. So if they have any questions while testing, they can go ahead and click on this, open up a quick chat with our support team, and they'll be able to connect with one of our agents rather quickly if they have any issues or if they have any questions while taking the exam. If there is a live pop-in that occurs when your students are testing, what that looks like is the whole exam screen will kind of go blank, and letting the student know that the exam is paused. There is a live proctor joining your session. They'll still be able to see their webcam view. The exam time in the background does not stop. So our proctors then join the student's exam session. They'll usually introduce themselves, letting them know that I'm your Honorlock proctor. And then they'll simply ask them to comply with any of those exam guidelines that they have maybe noticed the student was not exactly agreeing to. So maybe they're looking at a textbook and your guideline says no open book. We'll ask them to put the book away and shut it down or place it behind them. Now, once the student does comply, the proctor will automatically resume the exam for the student, and they will be able to pick right back up where they left off. On the Blackboard side here, everything is same as normal. So this should be very familiar to students, just taking their exam and navigating through the questions as they have previously done. As I mentioned earlier, they had actually back over on the previous question, I believe, they were able to go ahead and pull up that calculator too. So they are able to go ahead and access that information while they're taking the exam. Now, at the very end of the assessment here, once students are done with the exam, they'll click on Save and Submit. And at that point, there is no additional action needed on your students to close out of proctoring or end the proctoring session. That will happen automatically once they submit their assessment. So Save and Submit, we'll go ahead and exit the exam. And then you'll see that the proctoring session closes up. Webcam window goes away, so students are no longer actively being recorded. And you'll also notice my extension in the top right corner is no longer blinking. So visually, it's a great way for students to just confirm that the extension is no longer capturing their session. Now, if your students are worried about the extension, they don't want to leave it on their device, that's totally fine. They can right-click this after their exam and remove it from Chrome. They can do this every time. So every time they take an exam, they can go ahead and unadd or take away the extension. Just let them know that the next time that they do log in and take another proctored exam, they will first be required to re-add the extension to their browser. Now I am just going to pop back into my instructor account here, and that way we can take a peek at the results. But I saw a bunch of questions come through, so I'm going to take a look at those too in just a moment so we can get those answered for you all as well. Okay, so Shelton asked, is the code different for all students? I believe you're referring to the bypass code, Shelton, the one that we are looking at for bypass proctoring. Yes, so that code is going to be the same code, or I'm sorry, the code is exam specific. So any student enrolled to take that exam will be able to use that code to get in, which is why we recommend only passing it along to other proctors that will be monitoring the student's exam session in person. Each exam has its own individual code that will work for any student enrolled to take that exam. We're also going to talk about where the recordings are stored here in just a moment. And if the student is reading out loud the questions, does it flag the student? Is profanity also flagged? Profanity is not flagged, but the audio, what that is transcribed, will typically be bleeped out, is what I've seen. And if they're reading questions out loud, that will not, well, it'll flag it as just general speech detected. So if it's just speech detected, that'll let you know where they were talking during which part of the exam session. And if that speech was a buzzword for our AI, that will flag it, you know, as if it's the personal assistant, again, trying to use Siri or Google on their device out of the webcam's view. Perfect. And also thank you for elaborating on that, Gretchen. That's correct. Okay, so let's go back into Honorlock here so we can take a peek at where these results are stored and what that looks like on your end. So from the instructor view here, after your students have tested, because we are capturing HD video of both their webcam and their screen, we recommend giving the sessions up to 24 hours to render and be made available to review. So for example, the exam I just took, the full recording may not be available right now. However, if you check back later today, or maybe even in the morning, it'll probably be all available there so you can then review the entire session recording. So just keep that in mind if your students just tested 20 minutes ago and you're looking for the recording and it's not fully rendered, it just may take a little bit if it's a large class or a large exam. Once you're in your course here on the instructor end, you'll click on the Honorlock LTI. And this will bring you again into this homepage that we saw at the beginning of our training. And in here is where you're going to access those results. So on the right-hand side now is where you'll see this results option. And when you pull this up, this is where you're now going to see all of the students that have taken the exam. Okay, so as you can see, the one that I just took, it's still showing that it's in progress because it's still rendering that I was in that exam session. However, looking at this list here, you're going to see all of the students that have tested. You can filter this by your high incidence, medium, and low. You'll also see that the columns here will show you your students' names, their IDs, when they started the exam, ended the exam, and what that incident level looks like. Now, on the right-hand side is where you'll see then the view session option. So in order to pull up one of those exam sessions and begin watching that recording that maybe had a high incident level, those are the ones that we typically recommend reviewing as instructors, as those will generate those high AI flags, or could also include a live pop-in had occurred during the exam session. When we click on view session, this is going to pull up the student's session viewer. So I'm just going to pause it really quickly here.
Nice.
Give me one moment. I like to try to mute the student before they start because otherwise I have them talking over me. I wasn't as quick on that one. So as soon as I pause him, I should be able to right click him and then mute their mic. There we go. All right, so once you pull up the session viewer, this is what each of those sessions are going to look like. They're divided into 4 quadrants. In the top left corner is where you're going to see the student's webcam recording. Top right corner will include their screen recording. And once you click play, these will play together at the same time. Now, what you saw me do here when I first opened this up was right-click the video, and you can right-click both of them to show controls. This now allows you to scrub the videos independently if you need to see one speed up or maybe their webcam video a couple minutes in instead. This also allows you to make it full screen. So if you would like to, you can go ahead and open up that full screen view and take a peek at their screen to see exactly what they were doing on their device if it's a little bit too small. In the bottom left corner is where you'll see the information on the exam. So this will include those details that you had included, any of those exam instructions, guidelines, accommodations, and then the question will show up here as the student begins their exam based on what question they're on within Blackboard. Now let's say that this is maybe like a 90-minute exam and it's quite a long recording. When you're clicking play, you can adjust the playback speed and make it go a little faster if you would like, slow it down again, and be able to customize the navigation. In the bottom right corner is where you're going to see these session logs. And these session logs are going to include step-by-step timestamps and events of what had happened when the student started their exam session. So you'll see here was their profile picture and their ID picture. Here was the room scan. And then when they launched the screen capture video. From here, as you're scrolling down, and I'm just going to pause the recording to take a peek at the logs, we can now see any of those other flags that may have been captured during the exam session. This one, for example, had web traffic recorded, and we're able to see when an online resource was accessed, as well as what that online resource was that the student navigated to. Other medium flags that you can see here will include the student leaving the webcam view. High flags like this one below will also share when there was a live pop-in. And so what's really nice here is that you can click on any of these to quickly be brought to any of those specific timestamps and indicators during the student's exam session. I'm seeing some questions come through, so let me pull up that chat again. No, Deborah, you can't sort by high flag in this view because this goes in order of the exam, so from start to finish, but you can scroll through all of these logs over here and simply click on all of those high flags, and that'll jump to that area in the session recording so you can see exactly what was happening in that time. What's also helpful is that if you're at a certain point, you can then use these to jump back 10 seconds and then press play. So if there was any behavior right before that, you can see 10 seconds or click it again, go back 20 seconds and see what was happening prior to the flag. Okay, now the data retention policy here is going to be 6 months. So you'll have these sessions available within your Blackboard instance to view and these recordings available to access for up to 6 months. If there is an event of academic dishonesty, how that usually works out is If a proctor pops in and is addressing an act of academic dishonesty, what they do is they create a case on our end that gets sent to me. I then review the exam session that had the live pop-in and whether or not it was true academic dishonesty. And then I'll actually send an email directly to the instructor informing you of the exam, the student, and what that specific case was. So that way you kind of have a heads up as to what session to look at, what student may have not been complying with the exam guidelines, and you can go directly there to review that recorded exam session. Now, in the event that this has to be escalated for whatever reason, maybe there is an internal process for submitting academic dishonesty as an incident, you can download components of the video. So if I have to maybe send a recording of what the student was doing or using a cell phone during the exam, on the left-hand side here is where you can download specific access or aspects of their recorded exam session. All right, so from here we can actually close this, go back, and then you can go ahead and pull up any of the other exam sessions that you need to review. Again, this is where you can sort it, Deborah. So if you wanted to see the high flags, we can pull up all of just those high incidents. It makes it really easy to then sort out those exam sessions. Lastly is the summary report. You'll have that in the top right corner. The summary report is only going to fully populate once the exam's end date has closed. So we recommend leaving that exam window to a pretty tight, I guess, manner, a couple of days or however long the exam is going to be tested for, by students. Typically, instructors will leave it open for maybe like a week. I've seen some exams, though, that are set up and it opens in April and it closes in June. So if that's the case, just keep in mind that if the exam is open for a long period of time in Blackboard, the summary report is not going to show up until the exam's due date is passed. And the summary report is a really nice way to leverage kind of an overview here. And this is why you're only seeing one student because my exam is still open. But this is a way for you to come in and see what those exam sessions looked like, what kind of automated violations there were. And then it will also show you those incidents and those flags that had happened. So if you're not looking through all of those exam sessions in thorough, you can just come to the summary report once the exam's end date has passed, and then just review this report to see which sessions you may need to take a closer look at. All right, guys, so that pretty much sums up everything that I had for you all this morning. I know it was a lot, so thankfully this was recorded. I do want to take you all quickly over to our knowledge base, though, because we do have a resource here that is worth sharing. Our team is going to be hosting some upcoming Honorlock webinars. So we just updated this week, and we are going to be hosting these for any institution, any faculty member that would like to join and register to attend. They're open to anyone. These are really helpful because although I am hosting a couple of them, my colleagues are also hosting these as well, and they are specific on different topics. So understanding proctoring and student results. We also have specific ones for Blackboard, universal sites, and then other types of best practices. So I do like to recommend coming to some of these if you are open and are willing to kind of take a peek at what these offer. These are really great to just get another point of view for using Honorlock and a couple other tips and tricks that may be helpful. They are all coming up in the next month or so, and they are recorded and sent to you afterwards too. So even if you register, I believe all attendees will still even get a copy of the recording. Dr. Wilson asked a great question. Will there be an Honorlock intro video for students? So we do have student resources here on our knowledge base as well. For students starting an exam, you can come into this section here, and there is a quick student video on how to use Honorlock. This will walk them through it step by step, and you can go ahead and share this with those students that are going to be taking proctored exams. Alternatively, you can leverage this as well as the practice exam. So that way they get the video how-to and then the hands-on how-to on how to take the exam with proctoring enabled. A couple other things that I like to also include here that is really helpful to keep in mind is that in regards to getting started with using a new proctoring solution, Sometimes it may be helpful to let students know ahead of time as well that they're going to be using it. So we do have some suggested syllabus verbiage that you can copy and paste into your Blackboard course. Again, just to give students a friendly heads up, what's going to be required, what it includes, and if they have any questions, they can always contact our support team for more information. And then to be completely transparent, one of the other hot topics that comes up as soon as a new proctoring service is implemented is student privacy. So we do have all of our resources here on that as well. If you have any students questions or students reaching out with questions or concerns regarding what our extension does and doesn't do, a lot of these resources here will help to prepare you with the necessary information to pass along to students. So that way you can put a lot of those concerns at ease. I saw another question come through. Who gets a student back into the exam if they get kicked out? Honorlock, or do we need to reset the exam? If they get kicked out, it could be for obviously a few different reasons, right? If they lose their internet connection, they're kicked out of proctoring and they're kicked out of Blackboard. So they have to have a sufficient network connection in order to be taking the exam, number one, and then also be able to retain an active recording. So once the student has that back up and running, they log back into Blackboard and go to access their exam. It really depends on your Blackboard exam settings. So if it has been, what's that specific one in Blackboard here? I think it's called forced completion, or if there's only like the one option to go in and out, they may need to contact you in order to get back into the exam. Okay, so there's a problem with Respondus. No, you won't have to do that, but if there is an issue with an individual student and you had specific settings turned on that included students not being able to get back in, forced completion, or once it started, the test must be completed and they get kicked out, they may need to have that re-enabled. And yes, Deborah, the timer could run out. So if the timer runs out and it's on auto submit, the exam will be auto submitted then too. Awesome. Yep, you're welcome. And like I mentioned earlier, if there are questions that your students are having, okay, thanks for joining, Mariana. If there are any questions that your students have while testing, instead of them emailing you directly, feel free to have them contact our support team. We'll be able to check on your exam, see what had happened on their end, and if they're having issues getting back in, we'll do our best to diagnose whatever that issue is. However, if it was related to having just one attempt or getting kicked out and needing to have that re-enabled, we'll inform them to contact you too, just to have that resolved. All right, guys, you had some great questions today. Are there any other that I can help with before we wrap up? Sure, go ahead, Gretchen.
You might have mentioned this and I just missed it. So I know you said the videos are retained in the Honorlock cloud storage for 6 months. If for some reason that video needs to be downloaded and taken to a group, like if a department has like an academic dishonesty committee or something like that, can they download that recording?
Yep, absolutely, yes. So they live in the Blackboard here. So I mean, they are property of the institution. But correct in that there is just a data retention policy of 6 months from the instructor's end. If you do need to access one of those recordings and download it for an academic integrity case, when you're viewing that session, there is this download button on the left-hand side. And this is where you can go to retrieve specific components of that recording. Yep, you're welcome. Amy asked, that's true, Deborah. Amy asked, do students need to go back into Honorlock to review their tests? They cannot get back into Honorlock to review their tests once their exam is completed and submitted. As we saw, Honorlock automatically shuts down with their exam being completed. So they cannot get back in unless they re-authenticating and they have permission and access to access the exam again. Is that a setting in Blackboard that you're able to set up? But they can, yeah, if they're able to go in and review it later, that can just be something that's designated on the Blackboard end. That won't be like a proctored exam review though. We don't have the ability to authenticate students for exam reviews at the moment. It's just to go in and take their proctored assessments.
Yeah, I think when they click on it, it's going to show that the attempt has already been completed, and then it'll give them the button to view results or something like that.
Perfect. Yeah, it just won't be in a proctored environment. Thank you. Perfect. All right, guys. Well, we'll go ahead and then wrap it up here then. I will, like I said, send over, thank you, Stephen. I'll go ahead and send over the recording later on today. So if it's helpful, you can reference this in the future, and feel free again to sign up for any of those webinars. They will be really helpful too, and just getting another perspective here and learning a little bit about Honorlock. And if you have any questions that come up, feel free to reach out or contact our support team too. All right, guys. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it too. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks, John. Bye-bye. Talk to you soon.